it was shown how Israel was exiled by Babylon, and Jeremiah, being the voice, hearing from God and sharing this with the Israelites, commanded them to essentially build a life there, because they were going to be there for 70 years, for a long time. And today we're going to look at a different story in the Old Testament, which also kind of continues our themes of faithful exiles, but in a different sense. And it's in the book of Daniel. And we have a video that gives some context for the book of Daniel, kind of like what we did for Jeremiah 2 weeks ago, that will hopefully give you some context for the verses we're about to read. So yeah, Dave, whenever you have it ready, we can check that out.
Just give me a quick second.
Sure.
And was that coming through for everyone okay?
The book of Daniel. The
Okay.
story
Well,
set
here it
right
goes.
after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, and they had plundered the city and its temple and taken a wave of Israelites into exile. Among them were 4 men from the royal family of David: Daniel, who's later named Belteshazzar, and his 3 friends, who you probably know by their Babylonian names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book tells of their struggles to maintain hope in the land of their conquerors. The book's design seems pretty simple at first. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends in Babylon, while chapters 7 through 12 contain the visions of Daniel about the future. But this 2-part shape is made even more interesting by another design feature, and that's the book's language. It begins in Hebrew, the language of the Israelites, but chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, a cousin language to Hebrew spoken widely among the ancient empires. But then in chapters 8 through 12, it goes back to Hebrew. This design shows how chapters 2 through 7 are a coherent section, but it also highlights the importance of chapters 2 and 7 for understanding the later chapters of the book. Let's just dive in. Chapter 1 introduces the basic tension of the first half of the book. Daniel and his friends, they're really wise and capable, and they're recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. But they're pressured to give up their Jewish identity by living and eating like Babylonians and violating the Jewish food laws found in the Torah. So they refuse, and they choose faithfulness to the Torah, and it puts them in danger. But God delivers them, and they end up being elevated by the king of Babylon. After this begins the Aramaic section, which you'll see has this really cool symmetrical design. So first, the king of Babylon has a dream that, it turns out, only Daniel is able to interpret. It's about a huge statue made of 4 types of metal, and it symbolizes a sequence of kingdoms, and the head is Babylon. But then a huge rock comes flying in, and it shatters the statue, and it becomes this huge mountain. Now, this dream is the first of many symbolic visions in the book, and this one introduces the basic storyline of them all. Daniel says that the statue represents a train of human kingdoms following from Babylon, and they will all fill God's world with violence. But one day, God's kingdom will come and will confront and humble the arrogant kingdoms of this world and fill the world with the healing justice of God's reign and rule. After this, chapter 3 tells the famous story of Daniel's 3 friends who refuse to bow down and worship a huge idol statue, which, like the statue in chapter 2, represents the king and his imperial power. And so the friends are persecuted. They're thrown into a fiery furnace, but God delivers them from death, and they're exalted by the king, who now acknowledges their God as the true one. After this come a pair of stories about 2 Babylonian kings, the father, Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, Belshazzar. They're both filled with pride because of their imperial power. And so, like in chapter 2, God warns them both through dreams and then visions, which, also like chapter 2, only Daniel can interpret. He says that both kings are to humble themselves before God, and both kings arrogantly resist. So Nebuchadnezzar is stricken with madness. He becomes like a beast in the field. But then he humbles himself before God, and his humanity returns to him. He's restored as king. This is in contrast with his son, Belshazzar, who doesn't humble himself before God, and he's assassinated that very night. Now, these 2 stories draw this imagery from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and Psalm 8, where humans are depicted as the royal image of God. He's given them authority to rule over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air on behalf of God, who is the world's true king. But when human kingdoms forget that, when they rebel and make themselves and their power into a god, they become less than human, like violent beasts who will face God's justice. Which brings us to chapter 6, the pair of chapter 3. And this time it's Daniel who's being persecuted because he refuses to pray and worship the king as a god. And so, like the friends, he's sentenced to death and he's thrown into a lion's den. But God delivers him from the beasts. And like the friends, the king exalts Daniel and praises his God, which brings us to chapter 7. It's the pair of chapter 2 and the center of the book where all its themes come together. It's another dream, but it's Daniel's this time. And ironically, he can't understand the dream until an angelic messenger explains it to him. He sees a series of 4 beasts, one like a lion, then like a bear, then one like a winged leopard, each of these symbolizing an arrogant kingdom. And last of all is a super beast, identified as a really evil empire. And it has lots of horns, a common symbol for kings in the Old Testament. And there's one specific horn who is an image of an arrogant king who exalts himself above God and persecutes God's people. Now, they are symbolized by a figure called the Son of Man, who's an image for both God's covenant people, but also for their king from the line of David. But then all of a sudden, God, who's called the Ancient of Days, comes and he sets up his throne. He destroys the super beast and he exalts the Son of Man on the clouds, where he comes up to sit at God's right hand and share in God's rule over the nations. We can look back now and see how all of these stories in the first half fit together. The 3 stories of faithfulness despite persecution. These are meant to offer hope to God's suffering people among the nations. But they suffer because human kingdoms have rebelled against God and have become beasts. And so these visions encourage patience, that God's people are to wait for him to bring his kingdom and rule over our world and vindicate his suffering people. But it raises the question about when God is going to do that. And that's what these final 3 visions set out to explore. In chapter 8, Daniel has another vision about the final 2 beasts of chapter 7, but this time they're symbolized by a ram, who we're told is an image of the empire of the Medes and Persians, and then by a goat, who's an image of ancient Greece. And out of the goat come a whole bunch of horns, one of which symbolizes the evil king from chapter 7. And we're told more about him, that he will attack Jerusalem and exalt himself above God and defile the temple with idols. However, in the end, he will be destroyed by God, who will exalt his people and his kingdom. Now, by chapter 9, Daniel is very puzzled, especially as to when all of this is going to take place. And so he consults the scroll of the prophet Jeremiah, where God said that Israel's exile would only last 70 years. So for Daniel, the 70 years is almost up. And so he asks God to fulfill his promise soon. But an angel comes and informs him that Israel's sin and rebellion has continued. And so their time of exile and oppression will continue on 7 times longer than Jeremiah envisioned. Daniel is deeply disturbed by this, and he has one final vision. We're shown the same sequence of kingdoms. It's Persia, then Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the north, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and exalt himself above God. But then, all of a sudden, this king comes to ruin. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still others think it will be fulfilled in future events that have yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now, the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. But it opens up the possibility that, in a sense, they are all right. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus's empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's visions and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about.
All right, so I'm gonna pass it off to DP now to lead us in our Devo.
Yeah, thank you, Strada. Appreciate that, Strada. Yeah, just before we dive into the Daniel 1 is where we're going to visit today. Did you guys have any impressions from that larger video? I know it was quite a lot of information given in a very short amount of time, but any impressions or thoughts from that just before we transition to actually?
Again, I thought this was uh, some great illustration of structure, and I was encouraged to see that we've talked about with the Jeremiah passage that God's promises on our own timeline. And anyway, I'm excited. It was a great intro. Thank you for that, DP.
Yeah. Any other thoughts just on the initial overall look of Daniel, the book of Daniel?
Honestly, I sometimes get lost, like when I'm reading about all these things that have to do with like dreams and creatures that make zero sense, and I'm trying to imagine them in my mind, and that's so not the point of this. It's so much more about the interpretation of it. But I think it's really interesting that God puts a place and a purpose in lives where certain people are meant to interpret, certain people are meant to be discerning enough to know that something's trying to talk to them, whether it be God or something. So I feel like that just shows that in the midst of our lives, whether we're in crisis or we're in comfort, that God's got a purpose for everybody specifically.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. Yeah, I would say that's one of the big things about those prophecy books. It's just a good perspective on life. What you're saying there is you can get so lost in the details. And sometimes you just need to take a couple steps back and be like, oh, this is what's going on here over the whole book, not just what the heck is this horn, which is, believe me, much ink has been spilled over the book of Daniel, and we're not going to get as deep as these books go. But yeah, any other last thoughts?
It kind of reminds me of Judges.
In what way?
Like they're like sinning again, and it's gonna be like 7 times more time, but kind of just like the kings like not relying on God, then relying on God, the judges relying on God, not relying on God, stuff like that.
Yeah. That's a big pattern in scripture of switching between relying on God and not relying on God, and the repercussions kind of hit pretty hard in Israel. And yeah, we'll get to that chapter likely towards the end of when we're finishing up Daniel. But that's a pretty big thing of like things switch on you, expectations change again. And that's what we were talking about last couple of weeks with Jeremiah. All right, and so kind of bridge the gap of what's going on here. For those of you who've been following with us with the Jeremiah passage, the letter that we've been following, at least half of the letter, which is like seeking the welfare, the working with what's going on. If you look at Daniel 1:1, this is the direct path right between them both. So you'll just notice some funny looking names in Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar, and like Jehoiakim, the king of Judah. This is the exact same king that's happening in Jeremiah's time. And so this is the first exile. So what we're seeing here is we're kind of jumping through scripture in that this letter that we were reading last week is the same letter that Daniel is carrying into Babylon with him. So we're following this letter and seeing where it's going right now. Oh, and so that's kind of the bridge between what's happening. And this is the first Babylonian exile. Unfortunately for Israel, it's not the last, as chapter 8 kind of reveals later. But it's kind of this big kind of bridge edge between the two. And so what we're doing with our study is following the way of the exile. We're trying to understand, okay, that's the letter, that's the commands, that's the instructions that the faithful exile, the faithful remnant of Israel is being given. Now let's figure out what's letter, or when it's actually challenged, when it's actually put into practice, how that applies to us. So that's kind of where we're starting with. And then so I would like a couple readers from Daniel. Well, any volunteers?
I could do it.
I'll read.
Okay, so I saw 3. So Ernest, I'm gonna give you let's give you so Daniel 1. You can start from verse 1 up to, let's give you up to verse 5. Okay?
5 or 7?
Yeah, sure, 7. You
All
convinced
right.
me.
The first sections. Okay.
Yeah, so read up to 7. Carly, you can read 8
Yeah.
to, let's see, where's a good break? Sorry, I'm looking at a
16?
different Bible. It's all one big thing right now.
8 to 16?
Yeah, 8 to 16, and then Olivia, 17 to the end of the chapter. So 17 to 21. Okay?
All right.
Yeah, so go ahead.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge and understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego.
But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord, the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Arziah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who ate the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead.
Young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with him, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus.
Yeah. Thank you, readers. Yeah, so just kind of give some backdrop here, or we're going to move through this in the couple different sections that are kind of in front of us. And I'll just start with kind of giving you some background. So when you see in verse 2, when he's talking about the land of Shinar, that's the old name for Babylon. This is actually also referenced in Genesis in the Tower of Babel. It was the city of Shinar, or also Babylon. And so this is a lot of like commentators kind of see this as a similarity between the two in the same city, as well as the significance here with the treasury of God. And imagine the treasury is kind of like our modern banks. Things. That is where it wasn't really the palace as much, unless the king was evil. The treasury of the gods is where most cities would accumulate their wealth, because it would be into worship of that god, and saying this god is provincial over this city, and that's why we are worshiping it with our material goods, such as like whatever is valuable, whether it's agriculture, gold, etc. And so that kind of thing like that. And so think about that. If there's this theme going on here with the treasury of the house of God, and with some of the vessels of the house of God, is being now taken to Shinar, the house of his God. So this being Babylonian gods. So Yahweh's temple is being ripped up, and all the treasury that is there is then taken to Shinar. What do you think that sends a message to the ancients, to these civilizations, of which God is more powerful? Like, you guys get the question, like, what's the significance that's happening there, or in the eyes of just an onlooker?
That the Babylonian god is more powerful.
Yeah, that would be the assumption, especially if you're just watching a treasury taken up and dumped into another. Trotty, you seem to have a thought as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it reminds me a little bit of the story, and it might be in Joshua or Judges, I'm not sure, where the group had taken the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites and brought it with them to their temple,
Mm-hmm.
to the temple of Baal, I believe.
It was the Dagon and then the Philistines.
Yeah, the Philistine gods.
Yes, thank you. The Philistines. And then the god would fall at the face of the ark every day, which represented the supremacy of Yahweh, our God.
Yeah, but you have almost the opposite happening here, or seeming like. Do you guys agree with that or disagree with that? So is that what is happening in the context? So that's the context of what would be happening culturally in the minds and the assumptions of the people watching. Is that what's happening here in Daniel 1? Is Yahweh truly being defeated by the Babylonians? I see some head shaking. Why not?
It's Matt, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I probably jumping ahead a little bit. We see that that's not what happened, but it's just kind of a ruse. That's just, it starts out and some people might see it that way, but then in the end, God is the one who proves himself multiple times in the chapter, or in the book of Daniel, rather.
He does.
Yeah,
I think there's being a clue in this verse still.
Yeah.
All right.
Go for it.
You guys can so we have such a small crew. If you want to leave it unmuted, that's fine. because I see people just jumping in for the mute buttons. Let's just try it out. Let's just leave it off for now and see how that works. If it gets crazy, I'll start being organizing it a bit. But
There are no little
give it a
kids,
shot.
by the way.
Yeah.
That's true. That's the
True.
problem.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that at the end of verse 2 where it says his God, at least in my version it says it twice, those he carried off to the temple of his God and put in the treasure house of his God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, first of all, God is lowercase in this, and
Mm-hmm.
second of all, it's very possessive. It's like his God, not the God, you know, not a God that is all resolving. It's that personal God. So to me, even if I were, you know, even though I am reading this in a biased way, at the same time, I can also say, but that's just personally who he sees as the most powerful.
Yeah, and you're touching on also bias of the Hebrew writer. Is that in Hebrew you never lowercase or de-emphasize God, but when it comes to any other God, you definitely do. Oh, and so English thankfully kept that and kept capturing that even when they could put in a capital G.
But DP, there isn't capitalization in Hebrew.
But there is different ways of emphasizing.
There are different
It's not
vocabulary
capital,
used.
but it is,
Absolutely.
it's a way of emphasizing.
I was going to touch on a little bit of what Matt said. I know it's a little bit off the beaten path, but there's the assumption, and I guess it connects also with Lauren, is they see the supernatural through material lens. They see the objects, the buildings, and the spoils, the treasures, as the vessels. They see these as connected to God or connected to a deity. And I think in other parts of Old Testament, you know, trying to keep it in their context, they know that God is not only in his temple. Like there's an understanding that God is not limited to the ark is. The ark is important, but the ark is not the only presence of God or the only manifestation or assurance of the presence of God. So I'm just, you know, thinking of the Babylonians think by putting the objects of their god of the captured deity, they think they have captured him. When the Jewish people, especially the ones who are observant, they're like, they may or may not probably think that because God is not tied to his vessels. I don't know, is that too deep or too off?
Yes and no, but I'm not going to really go into it because Israel history and the view of vessels and the wider culture is a very interesting subject that we're not going to dive too deep into. But just look at the first three words of verse 2. And the Lord gave, so forwards, if you want to count the article as another word, and the Lord gave. That right there is showing who's actually the orchestrator of this entire event, and that's not something to pass over or miss, especially when you're coming up with these big ideas where it's like the foreign treasury is taken to another foreign treasury and all that kind of the temple kind of thing going on. And okay, Olivia, I hope things work out well tonight. Ada, I see you have to head out, but yeah, anything we can pray for before you?
No, I'm good. Sorry, I have to leave. Something's come up.
Okay.
You guys have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
You too.
Bye, Olivia.
Bye.
Yeah. So yeah, just what's going on. What I'm trying to just introduce here at the moment is there's a clash of ideas going on. There's two ideas happening here. The ideas of like Jerusalem as it should be God's way versus Shinar, Babylon, false gods, false ideas. And this theme is what we're going to explore a little bit more as we dive in. And but like this is where it starts getting introduced a little bit more between the two. And so continuing on, the third verse, I'm not going to dive into this one too much, but essentially by them capturing and taking the choice people, they can both demoralize Israel and build up Babylon. This is the same thing they did, like we talked about in Jeremiah, was that when you take the best of the best and the place that they're taken out of suffers and yours builds up. So it's a great strategy. And Nebuchadnezzar wasn't really interested in colonizing Israel, but making Israel a tribute to him. That's what Nebuchadnezzar was doing through all this like war period, is he was trying to pull people. He was trying to get tribute from these nations he conquered. He didn't want to rule them directly. So this was a really good way to kind of do it. It's almost like a hostage situation. I have your people and I'll kill them if you don't pay me. Or if you guys don't give me tribute, they're going to give me inside information and I'm going to come kill you. So it's a great war strategy, if I can say it's great.
Effective.
It was effective and it worked for the time period it was. But yeah, let's look at what's going on here with verse 4. Youth without blemish, of good appearance, skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, and to teach them, competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. So youth in this kind of time period, this would be about 12 to 14 years old. So we kind of look at Daniel as a super mature adult kind of view, but in much more likelihood, Daniel was probably between the ages of 12 and 14. And he was going to be in
Middle
training
school.
for 3 years. And so usually Babylonian youth start around 14. So that's why 12 to 14, a youth. That's all we're talking about here. We're not talking about some super or like spiritual or powerful person. We're talking about a 14-year-old. Oh, like imagine a 14-year-old taken from their home and now has been shifted off to a foreign land. Like this is the kind of person that they're talking to. And we all know that if you can capture the youth when they're young, you can mold them into whatever you want. And so it's a way of building up your land as well as indoctrination upon and who they are and what they are. And so kind of what our first idea that we're coming up against here is, what does a culture value? So this culture list off some of the qualities in verse 4 that you could see the Chaldeans, the Babylonians are valuing. What ideas are they valuing? So here, I'll type this question out for you guys too.
Wisdom and knowledge are two of the big ones.
Yeah, so wisdom and knowledge. What else?
Prestige and visibility.
What do you mean by that?
That, like, because they were conquerors of other nations, it's not like they were at war with the Jews. Like, in the context, obviously, God orchestrated it for his purpose, but, like, in terms of, like, from the flip side, like, they were conquering just to conquer, which means that they were pulling the prestige of being a conqueror and pulling the best for themselves and being the best. And then in terms of like the visibility, again, like that kind of goes along with when you are a conqueror, is that the world looks at you, and then there's a level of prestige that comes with that.
Yeah, prestige and visibility. All right. Any others?
Yeah, one of the ones that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Uh, yeah, just for some reason here they're into the folks who are, I guess, good looking and don't have any disabilities, it seems like.
Yeah, attraction and health.
Yeah.
Yeah, physical appearance seems to be high too, with wisdom and knowledge,
Yeah,
especially
Yeah,
during
Chad, what were you going to say?
presentations. Yeah.
yeah. And Justin, actually, yeah, the Babylonians saw beauty and intelligence as the same thing. So they thought if you were beautiful, you were intelligent. Just,
Wow, they're way off.
so
Yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking in an extension of what Matt, Justin, and Dave were all saying. A lot of ancient societies would place a very high value on physical beauty. I'm thinking of the Greeks as one. So I don't have an extensive enough knowledge of Babylonian culture to know whether they are one of those people, but based on what you just said, it seems like they are. And so like the idea of a physical appearance mirroring what's inside is a part of it.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Let's see. Any others? I guess wisdom and knowledge kind of capture teach the literature and language. But intelligence, I guess we could throw in there.
But I think it's I think the competent quality is different from wisdom and knowledge, because they're saying they have to be that seems a little bit more on capacity and, if I may say, manners, like the fact that they are quick to pick up cues, quick to pick up expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. Competence to be able to handle all this information. I mean, so yeah, these are, so to bring us back to what this kind of is these are cultural ideas from the Babylonians of what is significant, what is ideal. Do you guys can you guys think of any examples when it comes to our culture? What our culture considers ideal or things to be valued?
I think a lot of these still apply.
Mm-hmm.
I think honestly, like, I mean, we're not that different from then. Like, ultimately, like, sin nature and general societal culture that's not based in Christ is going to, it seems to be very common. Like, you know, like, you have to be good looking, you have to be smart, you have to be intelligent. What I think is interesting though is like there's like a catch-22, like they're like, yeah, we want you to learn and we want you to be competent, but also that idea of learning and competence isn't quite logical at the same time, that requirement. But I mean, I think a lot of them still apply.
What do you mean?
Which part?
That they're not compatible.
Oh no, just like it's hard to say. Like if you go from culture and like everyday, like what people think is cool, you'll notice that there's like a level of lack of intelligence in how people portray, act, but at the same time it's still considered to be an important thing, if that makes sense. But like it's again like the definition of it in a way is changed somewhat to what is intelligent then versus intelligent now.
I do think, Abby, going off what you were saying about our sin nature being connected to this, they did this study where they would show people pictures, two different pictures of politicians, and just based on how they see the person, who they would vote for. And almost every time the person who won was the person who like had the wider smile or looked more charming. And that kind of just goes throughout. If you look at politics, the people who get elected, it's not what they say, it's how they come across. It's how they look to people. It's how they, it's just the presence they have, which is extremely superficial. And I think what that shows us is, going back to what Abby said one more time, is our sin natures are attracted to things which have the presence of, I don't know, some sort of quality, which I don't know what the word is, but some sort of charm, maybe, that they would have called
Charisma.
Charisma, right? Yeah.
Good word, yeah.
But do these things, so just kind of following this track a little bit farther, do these qualities, such as charisma, competence, attraction, health, prestige, visibility, wisdom, knowledge, are these necessarily anti-God?
No, not in and of themselves.
So what's the difference? These can be kind of pro-God, or they can be anti-God.
I think it's what you're prioritizing, and if you're holding things up above God, or saying that someone has to be, all of these things, and just like, exalting somebody who's beautiful just because they're beautiful, even if they're a terrible person. That's.
But we also see the two, grabbing two random people in this exile,
Yeah.
Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, and random Abe, good old Abe, who have all of these qualities: wisdom and knowledge, prestige, visibility, attraction, health, et cetera, et cetera. What's the difference between Abe and Daniel? In that we remember Daniel but these people are kind of equal. And so
He has grace. Like,
Pardon?
he has a level of grace with it. Like, and how he holds himself. Grace, probably humility is a better word. But, like, I think that's what it boils down to, is that there is, like, this underlying, like, humility factor that happens with when you're, like, a servant of Christ, that at least should be, that underlies all of those qualities.
Yeah.
I think
So what I'm thinking here is that the idea that's being presented from the Babylonian perspective is ideas and things that they value, that they hold up in high esteem, and Daniel fits the mold of all of these things. And it doesn't really matter whether the Babylonians at this point are following God or not, because they're definitely not. They're not following God. But God is using Daniel in that circumstance and in that place, not because the idea itself is either good or bad, but because as God has placed Daniel with these qualities into this culture to be a light to this culture. So what I'm saying there is, sometimes the ideas can be a good or bad, like opposing to God. And in this case, they're all like what the Babylonians are doing. And they're all doing anti-God kind of ideas, because these are coming from their own cultural perceptions. But yet God can use these bad ideas and redeem them into something that he can work with, and that he can use to guide his story. So we're going to keep going into the next idea. But that's, I think, one of the first parts of an exile, is realizing the ideas that are surrounding you are the ideas of the culture, things to be valued, and learning to recognize them, but also learning to realize how God is using you into that quality of that culture. So Daniel just being a good-looking guy, that allowed him to actually enter into this place. And where you might see that, yeah, that's superficial, that's shallow, that's dumb. That was a gift that was being given to him that allowed him to speak to a people that would not listen to him otherwise. Just a thought to chew on. But yeah, so the next thing that's happening, the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were educated for 3 years. At the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. So what you have here is a Babylonian kind of court system where the king himself is determining the food that he eats, and the people are to follow in that thing. The king being the ultimate source of authority in this throne room. And so when he's decreeing that my people that's an interesting sound, are like to eat and to be educated, this is kind of a cultural norm definer. And so it's not just a thing of value, but it's shaping the culture itself. And so Babylon at this time period is the learning center of the world. At this time period, they are one of the most advanced language and literature of the ancients at this time. And they're now proving this by military conquest. So not only in thoughts of philosophy and ideas, but in areas of war and conquest, because that's how a king made himself great. He conquered. He showed that his ideas, his world, his view is the best idea. And the significance of what's happening with these guys is they need to not only learn this philosophy and this idea of the Babylonian law system and the court system and philosophy, but they have to actually pass judgment. And when they're moved into courts, they have to do disputes. So disputes that are happening in the land, this group of people that's being trained here are the ones who act as judges and leaders over the people of Babylon and the servants. So what's happening here is ideas from Babylon and are being shown how they shape how people look at morals, how people look at economy, how people look at political, sexual practices, all of it. Every part of the culture is being defined by this king, and the history that's kind of happening here. And so Daniel and them entering into this idea of assimilation, this idea of full on assimilated into this world. So think about that. Well, you're a 13-year-old kid and you're being told now to learn and be educated for the next 3 years. And at the end of this, you stand before the king. And I didn't really look too deeply into what happens at the stand of the king, but you're given a great job or you're set to the slave fields. So, like, if you fail out of this, you're probably either into a life of servitude or you're dead. Because they put a lot of investment in you. They paid for your Yale education, because that's what you're getting right here. You're getting a free Yale education level kind of teaching. But at the end of that 3 years, you better be useful. You better be something. So that's kind of the pressure that Daniel and them are going through. And they're learning the second idea that I kind of want to visit for a little bit is culture defining ideas. There's and things that are from a bigger philosophical base, a bigger knowledge base, and determine markets, war, philosophy, education, marriage, religion, all of this stuff. So is everyone tracking with me all right? Is this kind of, anyone have any questions or thoughts? Or we good? Okay, so if that's the kind of idea level that are happening at the Babylonian level, which Daniel is going up against, do we have any kind of those level of defining? Think now we're not thinking in the little value things of like, oh yeah, we value beauty or we value social media, but like think about like the bigger ideas that define and shape everything we are, or as Americans, we're all American or American-like.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our values are shown quite clearly in our Constitution, and are emphasized in the Declaration. So we think of like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as a core American value. I think about the principles of capitalism and how capitalism and democracy are linked, because when you're in a democracy, there's a certain amount of personal freedom you have as a citizen. And in capitalism, you have economic freedom. So those are kind of things that are ingrained in all of us, as Americans.
Yeah. What about ideas? So I'm going to throw out some ideas and you guys kind of chime in as things kind of come up. So ideas around work, like the value of work or what that is. What's the point of work in an American society?
Get money.
Money? Yeah. The big trade is you give time, your workplace gives money. Time equals money. That's a huge American phrase. That's a philosophy of work. That's a philosophy of how we understand work. Individual versus communal. How are these kind of looked in American?
More so individual, as long as it doesn't trample the rights of someone else or a community.
Yeah. So, yeah, like your own rights, as long as they don't step on somebody else's rights.
Right.
So how does that define how you would look at religion then?
So I would say everyone has a right, and the government would agree, to worship as they please, and believe what you want, do what you want, until like you go and if you believe a religion that says I should go kill or hurt somebody, that's where the line is drawn, when you're trampling on somebody else's freedoms or well-being.
I would even say, going off of what Matt just said, I would even take it a step further and say that the value of religion in America is that, like, it's okay for you, but it doesn't mean it's okay for me. The idea of like individual, like it might be okay for you, but that doesn't apply to me. It's this relativism that I mean, the Bible doesn't jive with, but
yeah,
it's extreme individuality. Like US is extreme individuality because and I think it kind of relays along what you guys were just saying, because ultimately everybody has their own religion at this point. Like there's no rule book anymore because everybody's like, well, we'll make our own. That's very, very common in the US. I mean, to the point where sorry, I live next to a gas station. Yeah, anyway, I'll leave that be because I've lost my train of thought.
How about in relation to sex and sexuality?
There used to be a lot more of you do what you do at home. Here in the United States, everything was quiet, and now there's more of what I want to do or express myself is valid and should be open. And similar to the religious environment, I do me, you do you. We don't pressure one another, and at least that's the current religion in a way is identity. I don't know. Is that, I don't know what the historic view was in terms of comparing it with Babylonians. DP, if you have a specific direction with it.
No, right now I'm just kind of throwing out what are some of these ideas that would shape essentially how we look at the world. And like we could sexuality, we're living in this weird paradoxical culture of we both value and think it's the the best thing ever by looking at our music, our televisions, our internets, how we talk about it, things like that. But then at the same time, it's almost nothing. It's so flippant. Like, I'll sleep with everyone and anything. I don't need to be. It loses its. On one hand, it's like so powerful that it kind of defines identities, and then on another side, it's like, well, it really just doesn't matter. Just do whatever you like as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Which
But then there is also the um, do whatever you want except criticize or except interfere with what I'm doing or what I think or say.
yeah,
So
like you have no chance to speak into it because it has such a value, but also such a value that we can't really discuss any way to make it valuable. I'm like, it's sorry, this is a thought getting away from me, but let's move on to what's another thought. Technology. How we how we view technology and internet, social media, Instagram, Twitter.
in what do you mean view in what way?
What kind of values, what kind of ideas are we presenting there through our technology to one another?
That's a paradox right now, because everybody is talking about how it's so good that we're able to connect this way, virtually, but then everyone at the same time is like, this is the perfect time to completely step away from technology and, like, become one with nature. And it's like, as much as we rely on it, we also think that it's in a lot of ways done harm to the world. So I think it's, people sit on both sides, but at the same time, it's like a necessary evil anymore. Like we can't go one day without using one piece of modern technology. And we just have built a new reliance.
Yeah, we've become slaves to it.
In some sectors of life, not I wouldn't say all sectors of life, but I agree with Lauren that there is the paradox of everyone do their own thing versus everybody be plugged into the same network. And if you're not plugged into the network, then your contribution to society is basically nil.
Yes, and you know what? It's so relevant even in this current coronavirus, because I can't tell you how many things I've seen or people that have told me, like, how are you living your best life in this coronavirus? And people are thinking about you living your best life, meaning completely stepping away and doing something you'd never need technology for. And then on the other hand, people are like, use technology to write like an 80-page novel in the next 2 months.
Mhm.
And it's like, to me, it just seems so backwards. Like we have, like DP was saying, it's like it's a new type of slavery that we've become, I'd say, very accepting of, because if we're not going to be a slave to technology right away, we quicker become a slave to some other type of aspect to our lives that involves technology. It's like leaked its way into everything that we do.
Yeah, like individualism, this technology of like pull away, get closer, write a novel. Our phones are so custom built to us as our individual presentation of who we are. And yeah, we've let a lot of ideas about larger things seep in through technology and define technology, such as our demand of time. You have to respond right now. Like you need to click on that notification. And these things are not made for our health. These things are not made for us. They're made for us to be addicted to. I don't know if it was here or somewhere else, but like that whole like pull down Facebook and you see that little wheel spin and then it comes back up. That's the same addiction experience that happens in a casino.
Yep.
Was that here or somewhere else? I don't know. I was
Yeah.
talking at some point this came up, but maybe that was here. But that whole little thing, they don't need to do that. They could design it without that little wheel spinning. The way that we've built our technology, that's not needed, but it gives that euphoria of a slot machine, the kind of continuum that happens in a casino. See, these things are not made for the most life-giving. They're made for the most addictive, attention grabber thing. And our solution can't be burn it, destroy it, run away from it. Good luck. We're using technology right now to connect us. So, what can we do? Before we get there, I'll very quickly, and we might be diving into these quite a bit more in our breakout sessions. So this is me advertising for the breakout sessions of Come On Back, because we're probably going to be talking about these kind of themes and more deeper as we kind of go. But our third idea, which is in 6 and 7, is ideas that shape religion, ideas that shape our conception of God and gods and worship. We're not going to dive into it much, but the significance of verse 6 is that saying the names of our 4 main protagonists, our 4 main characters as the tribe of Judah, versus 7 when they're given different names. Just because I'm moving quickly right now, I'll just copy and paste what these all mean. So you can take a look at it, copy and paste it into your own. But basically all 6 are talking about God so for just example, we'll just use Daniel right now. Daniel's name means God is my judge. That's what the name of Daniel means. In the new name, Daniel is called Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar is the prince of Bel. Bel is the chief god of the Babylonians. Belteshazzar is also a name for Babylonian kings, certain monarchs in that time. So for him to be named Belteshazzar is a prince of Bel, meaning he is a servant of the high god, the chief god of the Babylonians. You see how big of a shift that is from God is my judge, Yahweh is my judge, to Belteshazzar is my king, my kingship. Anyway, all 4 names are just like that. So, the third idea that just really gonna summarize really quickly is these are ideas that are flagrantly just anti-God. The last 2 ideas that the culture values, ideas that the culture looks at, these can turn into ideas where we can, as Christians, kind of redeem them. As believers in Yahweh, we can redeem them. We can see how God can be moving through things like individuality and even capitalism, socialism, technology, all these things. They could go very dark and evil, but they also could go towards bringing God glory and great things like that. This last idea, this is a flagrant, these ideas are against God. And these are the third category of ideas that exist in any culture, which is we will find things that are absolutely unequivocally trying to oppose God, and they're not really that redeemable. Well, I'm not going to try to come up with examples, but for example, I'm not going to try to come up with examples. Moving on. All right. So what we have here, moving into verse 8, is we have a whole kind of thematic switch. Is the previous 7 verses are kind of setting the stage for what's happening, and how I'm kind of talking it through is different, of the form of 3 different ideas that a culture values, ideas that define cultures, and the third is ideas that are in opposition to God. And all 3 of these ideas exist simultaneously in any culture. That's my working theory, and you can agree or disagree, and we can talk about that later. But what we have here is Daniel's approach. So looking at verse 8, what is kind of the first couple words, what does that kind of tell you about Daniel's approach? So we're looking at a faithful exile's response to the flagrant ideas, the three ideas that were presented in the last one.
You're saying Dave, could you write down the question? And just, it helps visual learner people to have a concrete anchor.
Yeah, I got you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Daniel is showing a response to these ideas of culture. What is the first thing he begins with?
There's the self-determination, the saying that he will not defile himself, he will not make himself unclean with the food and drink that he is being provided.
Okay.
So it's like telling himself in his mind, and then following it up with action.
Okay, so kicking it to the group, any ideas of what's wrong with the food?
It broke Jewish dietary restrictions.
May or may not. There's no evidence of that from the scripture passage, but some of it may be breaking the law, some of it may not.
Yep.
So why does he say no to all of it?
Is it like offered to idols or something? I have no idea why this would be defiling.
I think
Would it be maybe perhaps like along the lines of like the whole concept of being in the world but not of it, like kind of just not partaking in the concept of the king knows best, the king is the only way to live, like his way or the highway, so to speak.
Well, that's kind of what it is, his way or the highway. You follow the king or you die. So
What Matt said sounds like something that I've heard before. I don't know if you're going to touch on that, Dave, or DP.
well, like Matt's on there. And that was kind of what was being introduced in when we were talking about Shinar and Jerusalem, Temple of God, this temple. There's an association with idol worship going on here. And like here's a couple things to consider. The problems with the food, I'm just copying and pasting this to you, is law of Moses prohibiting certain foods, which Ernest may or may not be present here, but more unlikely in a foreign land, probably are present. What Matt's saying, association with idol worship, ritually unclean. Some commentaries like to say it's possible political thing. So to ally themselves utterly with the Babylonian king as lordship, as giver of sustenance, because that's what's happening here. So it might be a political move and a non-violent non-conformity. So it's a way for him to oppose what's happening here, but non-violently, which keeping in mind that the Jeremiah letter of seek the prosperity of the city, and then things like that. So he's not here to be a rebel. He's not here to start a war, or he's here to respect. But so that's the problem with the food. Let's get back to Daniel's response. Take a look at, these are some different versions. Just look at what I wrote down there. Carly, what do you see? I haven't heard your lovely voice in a bit, so go ahead and talk.
Hi. What do you want?
What do you see? So what I just shared there,
Yeah.
what is in common with Daniel's response?
He decided wholeheartedly, like he wasn't gonna go back and not do it.
Yeah, there's an attitude kind of going on here. The first part of Daniel's response here is he's resolved to. He thought carefully in his conscience. He made up his mind. He purposed in his heart. Daniel was determined. Daniel placed control upon his heart, his whole being. And that's kind of what the Hebrew is kind of talking about here, is Daniel is not accidentally falling into this. He is consciously and willfully going forward with this. That's a big deal, especially if you're 13 years old.
I was when thinking about character, sometimes it's for any age group, but to take control over your own thoughts and your own actions and hold yourself to those thoughts and to those actions despite any external pressures is incredible for a person at any age, let alone a person who's, as Trada and I know, middle school is not fun. And when the kid is like, I'm not doing it, it's like they're not doing it. But this one is also like there's a control. I kind of connected to the entire verse and just say he's placing control on his heart to not be unholy or not to be unclean.
Yeah. And look at verse 9. What does that tell you about the significance of what's going on here too? Especially, like, in my notes, I call this his attitude. So first off,
Verse 9?
Willfully, a deliberate act. He's not kind of falling in this, he's resolving to do this.
Mm-hmm.
What does verse 9 kind of tell you about that, though?
God was backing him up on that, obviously.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not a solo act.
Right. And he's being observed. His actions are not just a private. I think when we talked a little bit earlier about American values, like what you do in your own home is up to you. Daniel's choice is not his own home. He's doing this in front of the supervisors and the authority figures.
Yeah. Yeah. God's opening the eyes of those who are not his.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God is giving favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs, the enemy's chief guy. Like, the world is watching. And what does the chief of the eunuchs response tell you in verse 10? Let's kind of walk break. So for visual learners, I'll type out my question.
Especially when we can't hear the signal because it breaks up a lot.
So, what response is happening from the chief? Name each part.
He's afraid. He's afraid of the king. Really, but he ends up allowing it, basically saying, as long as it doesn't affect you, that's fine.
So let's before we get to the part where it turns out people are heroes. let's look at right now what's happening, which is the fear of the king. What's behind that? Why would the chief be afraid of the king?
Well, he's one of those people who would have his head because of it if he, wasn't properly feeding the men.
Yeah. So what's the idea behind that? So like so he literally will cut off his head if he doesn't take care of the guys he's supposed to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cultural idea of authority, punishment, justice, education. That's the ideas Daniel is going up against right here. And for just that phrase is, I fear my lord the king, so you would endanger my head with the king. This chief has something in mind and in the backdrop of why he's saying these things. What else? What other ideas? What other parts are happening in this response?
I don't know if this is repetitive, but I'm just coming to the idea of someone else's choice would be affecting you. Like we've been talking about how our culture is, you can make a choice as long as it doesn't affect me. But in this case, it's, I'm not okay with you making the choice that you're about to make by not following this rule because it does affect me.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an employee, a manager-employee relationship that this chief eunuch is kind of thinking from. A master-slave. If certain things are not fulfilled, he's the one to blame, which kind of flies in the face of something like individuality, and which, honestly, sometimes work in culture, but we show it doesn't by having a set of requirements to be able to do this kind of thing. So anyway, that's another thought, but that kind of employee master slave relationship is happening here.
There's also, I'm looking at the middle of verse 10. Why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths of your own age? This is a practical person that he knows, like, not scientifically, but he knows from the data that he's in trouble. He knows that there's going to be danger, and he's, coming from a place of practicality. Like he says, this is what's going to happen. You are going to look bad, and you are going to be sickly, and this is, you know what I mean? Like there's a.
It's belief about how the world works with health, science, and sickness, and what is good for the soul. I mean, what is good for the body, what's not good for the body. Yeah. Sasha, do you have any ideas of different things like that? This chief's response.
Well, chief is following what has been commanded. So he is just the one who is doing what was said from above. And he is not the one who is changing anything. It's not up to him.
Yeah.
He is just, how you call that person? The one who just does the work, not the one who is actually put some thinking, and he just controls things. So
yeah, he's talking to a patsy, a guy who's not really that high on. He's high on the authority chain, but not so high that he can kind of define this part: who assigned your food and your drink. He doesn't have that power to assign one or the other. That's not up to him.
No, but he has just authority to control.
Yeah, he enforces
the procedure.
Yeah, he enforces the king's will, which also, that's another thing that Daniel's going up against. Daniel is going up against the will of the king. Daniel is, by resolving not to do this, he is saying, I am more knowledgeable than the king of Babylon. My choice is better than the choice of Nebuchadnezzar. So you have religion tie into here. And so this is not just a little like, oh, it's a dietary thing. these are the kind of things that Daniel is going up against. One of the commentaries like to point out that what Daniel is doing here is he's putting himself apart from the peers. He's saying in that, like, that's what they're doing, but I'm going to do something better. And so he now has peer clashes going on. And his peers are being like, well, why are you getting to make your own choice? We didn't get this choice. So you have now a peer-to-peer problems going on. And you also have, it'd be really easy for Daniel to abandon his belief. Jerusalem is very far away. From his perspective, it's not that hard to see that God abandoned Jerusalem. So why should, and this Babylonian God is more powerful now. So let's abandon it here. God abandoned us before, let's abandon him now. And so these are some possible things, but what word would you use to kind of summarize all this? I give you one or two words to talk about all of this, what we all just kind of discussed here, what would the word be?
Against current.
Against current. What else?
Rebellion.
Rebellion.
Countercultural.
Countercultural.
Faithful.
What was that?
Faithful. Sorry.
Faithful?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, like, I just go back to the verse that says how Daniel was so determined to follow Christ and not to eat the food and wine, to follow what he believes in. Just shows how faithful he is in Christ and how his faith really makes it his own. Like how we're also saying how Daniel is so young, but he just comes to this kind of like mature point, just like, this is my faith, this is my own, like, I'm gonna follow Christ till the end.
Yeah. Okay. Any other words? Okay. So I'll throw what I kind of came up with, which is adversity. All of this is adversity of why this should not work. All of these are reasons why Daniel should not get his request done. Everything you've said is a reason to deny Daniel's request. And what I would say that's the second part of a cultural response for a faithful exile is adversity is normal and expected. You should be opposed. If you're not, you're with the culture. The culture has nothing to oppose you on. You're not really presenting a new idea or a better idea or a different idea. You're just presenting their idea. So, like, if you have an idea that is opposite or different than the idea presented, it will be met with adversity. It will be met as a counter against the current. It'll be met as a rebellion, countercultural, and your response should be faithful, but their response should be to oppose you. And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially if you want to be faithful. Like, our whole thing is called a faithful exile. That's great until somebody tells you you're wrong, that your idea sucks, because they have a whole world of ideas back here that are coming out right here to oppose you. So Daniel is expecting that adversity, and let's see, what does he go into? So let's keep reading. So then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. What's this? What is this?
He provides a solution.
A solution. What do you mean by that?
Like he's saying, if like you get weak, well, the eunuch or whatever he's called is saying like he'll have my head if you guys get weak and whatever, and you're going to much less. And Daniel's saying, okay, but like give us 10 days and see who's stronger. And he knows like he's putting himself out there, but he's also relying on his faithful God that he will see him through.
Yeah, he's meeting him. Like he's not. So he could go two different responses here, opposed to his test response, which is, no, I reject you because I am holier than thou. I know the truth of the way of Yahweh, the way of Judah, the way of Jerusalem. That is the way of God. This is the way of Satan. Get behind me. They like, not to quote Jesus in a terrible way, but like that kind of arrogance, that kind of level of opposition, rebellion is. And would he have been wrong to do that? Probably not. He's going up against cultural ideas that are opposed to God. Or the other is like, yeah, you're right, Chief. You got it. I accept. I recognize this is a problem for you. I recognize you're going to go up against these cultural giants of your own. And to make it easier on you, because I want to love you and care for you, I'm just going to obey you. So those are two responses that didn't happen, but I can think of many responses in my own life where those two were the responses I took. Much to the issue of what actually happened is that I either went to, I know the truth, I believe the truth, I studied the truth, therefore I have the truth. Or, well, I just want to care for you and I just want to love you so much and I want to sacrifice my own will, my own happiness, my own God, because I want to make you happy. I have to say yes to you. I can't say no to you. Those suck, but those have responses in more times than I can count, probably. So let's dive a little bit more into what Daniel's response is. So compromise, how is it a compromise?
I guess the implication there is that if after 10 days that it looks like they're weaker for it, then they'll switch over to eating what everybody else is eating.
Yeah. Daniel's putting what he believes on the table. Like he's not just playing around here. Like he's compromising, but like he has to prove this at the end of it. So, the way he says it, test your servants. He's taking a very submissive approach here. He test your servants is not something you say to somebody you think you have more authority than. It is something you say to show respect and admiration and submission. But yeah, this proof of outcome, it needs to be proven. When we, as faithful exiles, when we come at something, do we actually believe it's good at the end of it? Or are we just saying it because we think we know what it is? As like, are we willing to put ourselves, our lives, our own well-being on the line to show that God is good or that God is greater? It's easy to say in a protected environment, much harder to do. Yeah. What's this, like, what else could be happening in here? Any other kind of observation? Okay. So verse 14, he listened to them and tested them for 10 days. This is not a follower of Yahweh. This is not a Israelite, but he's relenting and and he is listening to it, and he's willing to actually do it, because Daniel approached it from an approachable way. The chief won't lose face at 10 days, but if it is successful, it moves into a godly outcome. And I think, and so like, that's kind of Daniel's way to do this. So again, going back to our thing, if you were to summarize the verses into a word or 2 words, what would it be? Yeah.
Compromise.
Confidence.
Okay, so yeah, I just wrote down Daniel's actions can be summarized into. So this is just for these 4 verses. Compromise, confidence.
If you don't mind me doing alliteration, I'd say commitment, as we say, in the face of those peer pressures and the fears of his supervisor.
Yeah. And what kind of attitude is he coming in towards the eunuch as?
Like submissive and respectful.
Respectful, submissive. Yeah. Any other summaries? Justin? Anything else?
It's a very loud music going by outside right now.
Yeah, kind of like how other people were saying how like he's also like determined, and also like he's still respectful towards like the guard, like please test your servants, not like demanding and showing like aggression. So
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. The one I wrote down, and you guys kind of touched on this, approachable. So this whole test is approachable. It's respectful. It compromises on both sides, but he gives it in a confident way. It shows a level of commitment behind it, but not so much that the chief eunuch feels he's committing his head to this situation. He's not endangering his own head, and it's submissive and determined. And so, like, the third kind of approach of a faithful exile is somebody who's approachable. If you are going to go into this culture like we have, a culture that has opposition and should oppose you, you need to be somebody who can be approachable in that place, to give them a way to kind of come out of this situation not feeling like you've taken advantage of them because you're smarter, or you're trying to be a zealot over punishing them or things like that, but still a way that moves the outcome from a place of where it is to a more godly outcome, but in a way that allows the person to go at their own pace, because he wasn't determining the chief's pace. He was going with something the chief was comfortable with, that the chief could find good, because the chief now is kind of can save face. So let's go to 15 and 16. Same kind of idea of what we're doing here is I'll read the verses. You guys tell me what is the summary, what is the dive into the text, use the words that are happening in front of you, and to show what's happening. So at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youth who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. What is this?
Realization.
Realization of what?
Like that the king's meat and wine is not the best thing for them.
Yeah.
Also that like I don't know if he thinks anything of Daniel's God now, but maybe.
But maybe, yeah. We're not really shown what the chief thinks internally, but we do see what the chief thinks in action. So let's keep going with what that action is. Yeah. Let's go back to our one word. Summarize this in one word for me.
Summarize what?
15 and 16.
Okay, thank you.
From the faithful exile, Daniel's response, and just the story itself, what's happening in the story itself in 15 and 16.
Justified?
Justified? Okay.
That Daniel is justified in his conviction and his action.
Mm-hmm. What's another word?
I guess counterintuitive. It seems like it should be the other way around.
Yeah, this is
I feel better and more nourished if I'm having some meat and some wine versus vegetables.
yeah. What would you say would be the response from the chief's view? What word would you use to summarize his view?
Acknowledgement.
Acknowledgement.
Satisfied.
Satisfied. Sasha, Abby. Abby, you still with us?
I think she left a while ago.
Nope, I am here.
Okay.
I'm cutting in and out a lot, so I'm not hearing questions very well.
Okay, I'll get better at.
So he is able to accept another way of things.
Yeah, accept. Any others? How does this? So how could these one words connect to a faithful exile response? Kind of following the idea we're following.
Perseverance.
Perseverance. So take these words and relate them to Daniel and a faithful exile and how to approach culture.
Well, I think that continuing with the theme of faithful exile, a lot of what we've been talking about is this idea that we're not, it's not our timeline, it's God's timeline. So with last week, it was being the 70-year believer instead of the 2-year believer. And with that comes the requirement of perseverance. In order to be a long-term believer, you need to have perseverance, and you need to have that. I guess endurance would be another word maybe that we can add too. So I think that that's how it connects.
Mm-hmm. how does these two verses, 15 and 16, relate to seeking the welfare of the city? How is the city or how is this group better for what Daniel did?
Being better nourished, and also showing them the love of Christ through their actions.
Yes, but Jesus isn't here yet. Remember, we're in ancient
Mhm,
Babylon.
mhm.
God.
Well, we discussed in the beginning what the culture values. So as we see that they knows that can be actually can look better, and their appearance can be better, and they value appearance. So that's how he promoted like better food and better drinks for better appearance.
Yeah, I want to highlight that for a second. And what Sasha is pointing out there is when Daniel is approaching the seek the welfare kind of attitude, that's accepted by the culture around it, especially in this relation to health and food. It takes what the culture perceives as a value of beauty and health and elevates it at even a better level than the culture itself is thinking about. That's hugely significant because do you think God himself cares about how we take care of our bodies, how we take care of our eating and our habits and our food and our sleep, as the creator of our bodies? And he's and so it doesn't, the culture values this as well, but in following God, Daniel takes it to a level above even what the level of the Babylonians understands. Taking a good idea from the Babylonian culture and turning it into a godly idea. Like, that's, I think, what seeking the welfare does for a city, for a community, is you can take the ideas and the culture and the thing that's in front of you and you can elevate it to a better level, but not just a better level of prosperity, but a better level of godliness. And that's what I think we as Christians are called to do. Is we're not called to compromise things and fall into the culture. We're called to elevate it. We're called to bring it to a level of where it was and where it could be, and it's shown through our lives and like the word accept or acknowledgement. The culture acknowledges a good idea. That's what cultures do. They acknowledge good ideas that work. Not everything is going to work out in our favor. Not everything is going to be met at and be for the right time and the right audience. But a faithful exile, somebody who approaches it from this kind of attitude of acceptance, and when a good idea is presented that works, people take notice. I don't think I'm being too crazy with that thought of good ideas are good ideas if it shows that it can work.
Mhm.
That's what Christianity comes down to. Christianity is a good idea because it actually works.
It again, it depends on your definition of works. It depends on the outcome. So if works means it's in your benefit, or works is in, it lines up with your
Benefit
goals.
scripture. Not just works for myself, but works for the benefit of many. Works for the benefit of culture, works for the benefit of society, works for the benefit of seeking the welfare of the city. Not just the individual, but more than the individual. But at the same time, the individual body who's eating here in Daniel benefited. But because he benefited, and because the eyes of this chief eunuch saw it, more benefited. He just redefined this whole nutritional thing and was accepted for it. I don't know. I feel that's pretty significant. Okay. So just kind of bringing
I
up,
agree. I agree.
It's just how it's
Not just
expressed.
me.
It's difficult to. It's taking time.
So, Carly, I'll get back to you with your question later. But because she just sent me a smaller one about the Bible.
You could have just texted me later and not mentioned it.
It's true, but I'm kind of flying up the seat of my pants right now. No, I'm kidding. So verse 17, and as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had an understanding of all visions and dreams. Again, following what Trotta was talking about before on God's timeline and God's control, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. Let's not skip over the significance that is happening here. This is all pagan culture. This is not Jewish holy texts. These are not the ways of the rabbi or the ways of God. God is giving them learning and skill in literature and wisdom that has nothing to do with God, meaning God's people. It has nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with Jerusalem or Judea or any of that stuff. Yet God is giving them success in these fields. What does that define? What does that tell us about all our fields? I mean, fields of study, not agriculture.
They all matter. Like, you should give them all to God and serve Him in them.
Yeah. All these fields can be God's fields. Why? Because he's the one who gave Daniel and them learning and skill in literature and wisdom. God can use these fields for his own purposes. So what are some kind of fields that are out here? Just list off your field of study from school or work or whatever.
English and psychology was my major.
English, psychology. What else?
History.
History.
History of being a McDonald's worker.
History, McDonald's worker, yeah. Throw in employment too.
Music and linguistics.
Pardon? Music
and linguistics.
and linguistics.
Communication, marketing, and the biotech industry. Or life sciences, rather.
Yeah.
Psychology and PCA.
Psychology, PCA. Yeah. Every one of these fields have truth and understanding in them of how they can best operate in their own cultures. And I think God has a lot to say in each one of them. I'm like, the Bible may not talk about areas of science that Abby has learned in school.
I didn't learn them in school. Wait.
Okay. All right. I need a better example then. Okay. I'll just go with the illustration I've kind of heard and used at times. Does anyone trust me here to help them take out a cavity?
No.
Why? Guys, I have God's truth on my side. I know the Bible.
You don't have training.
Trust
Well,
me.
actually,
Cavity.
my dentist appointment got canceled twice, and I don't know when they're going to fix the cavity. So let's go for it.
I got you, buddy. Just to define this for you, I have zero dental anything, and I know that flossing teeth is good. So there's my knowledge. I think they're made of calcium, maybe.
There's something in there. Enamel, calcium.
Yeah, I'll find a bone. All right, so why don't you trust me to put a cavity in your mouth or to pull a cavity out of your mouth?
That's why.
That's how much I know.
Lack of training.
Yeah, lack of training. What else did I just show?
You don't even know what the tooth is made of.
Yeah, lack of knowledge.
Wisdom, putting in a cavity versus taking one out.
Lack of wisdom. There we go.
Or knowing how wisdom is knowing how how to exercise, like how to talk to people and say, "Come and get it," as opposed to "Come and get pain," or there's a lot of issues, DP, on how you did that, but it's okay.
Yeah, I know. There's lots
And
of why I should not be anywhere near your mouth.
mhm.
But like, that's the kind of logic sometimes we come at with, it's like, because we have God's truth, this means I must have other truth everywhere else. But there's truth to be found in a dentist's office,
That is a danger.
dental school, or the knowledge in the sciences and things like that. And all truth belongs to God, but not all truth is found in Scripture. And when we look at it, when we look at these fields as possible avenues and cultures that we can break into in trying to understand truth, but elevating it to a point of God, of like how a dentist will approach the thing of work, of caring for the patient, of not overcharging, of honest work and things like that. And we can see how, well, like all these places of literature and learning and knowledge that God can grant us knowledge can be ways to elevate and lift up God in our workplaces, in our fields of study. And sometimes these ideas might be very anti-God or anti-Christianity or anti-morality or things like that. But that's the point is of what's going on here with Daniel is in a world where these ideas are very honestly against God. So much so that they literally broke into his temple and stole all the goods and brought it back with them. But God's in control, God's in leadership, and God can use people in these cultures and excel in these cultures to elevate him. Does that make sense? So
That does.
yeah. And Daniel has understanding in all visions and dreams. Visions and dreams are not only significant to the Israelites, they're hugely significant to the Babylonians. That's why when we watched that video at the very beginning, when it talked about Daniel interpreting dreams and being the only one who can interpret dreams, this is putting Daniel in a very privileged power position of authority within Babylonian culture. And it's because he has an understanding of visions and dreams given to him by God. So God is granting him specific abilities, specific knowledge, specific things that allow him to elevate in a pagan culture so that God can be glorified. And that applies to every single one of us too, is God has granted you specific experiences, specific abilities, specific things and knowledge and insights into different areas of this world. And when we realize and excel in these things and then move it towards a godly outcome, elevating godly ideas instead of worldly ideas, we can bring God glory. But it's starting in that God gave you these things, opportunity where you're born, and the abilities you have, skills, background, etc., and moved you along in this road, education, life, a skill, natural aptitude towards things. And these are now opportunities like Daniel had of visions and dreams to use this into the society that's around us right now. So the last part is, we won't get into the rest of the passage, but the last part, a faithful exile, it's an application. A faithful exile is useful to the culture around them. They may be punished by it, they may be hated by it, they may be ignored and exiled by it, but they are useful to the culture because they are elevating they're elevating a godly outcome instead of a worldly outcome. The culture of Babylon can only do one thing. They can only elevate the Babylonian culture. What Daniel can do is elevate a godly outcome. And that's the dual thing of a Christian. We, American, as a person, can only elevate American ideals. You guys are American and beyond American. So you can elevate American ideals and ideas, but beyond that, you can elevate godly ideas and godly ideals, which go above and beyond America, just like they went above and beyond Babylon. And this applies in our workplaces. This applies in how we apply on social media, our families, our friends, our enemies, is everything. So that's where we're kind of going to end today. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to think about this and take it into your small groups. Perhaps where is God placing you? Where has God put you? And how can you walk the faithful exile response of taking the right attitude, being a deliberate attitude, realizing adversity is going to be a normal and expected response, to be approachable to the people and the ideas and the difficulties that you're going to face, to realize just being accepted and accepted ideas, a perseverance and that good ideas are good ideas. And so I encourage you to come up with some and then and also apply them. Apply the culture that you're from, the knowledge that you have, the skills and expertise you have. Take what you have and elevate it to something beyond what the culture has. So.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Any ideas on how to do that?
Maybe we can explore that this coming week.
All right, so that kind of brings me to an end, and yeah, now I think we'll give it back to Charles. We have some ideas for next week. Do you have any segue besides that? Other than we're gonna pray before we leave tonight too, but. So, yeah, try to. So we're probably not going to be meeting next Saturday night. But what do you guys think about meeting Sunday morning, or doing something kind of related? Because we'll be putting Faithful Exile on hold until 2 weeks from today. So.
Yeah, so the thought was possibly on Sunday morning doing some sort of, if this is something that you guys would want to do, some sort of fellowship, or where we go on our computers and just meet, Zoom, maybe even just have breakfast together or some. I know it's weird to have breakfast together virtually, but whatever. I mean, whatever it is we wanted to do, the important part being the fellowship, and maybe there's just a little message or whatever on Easter, and kind of just to connect, because this Easter is going to be different for all of us. We're not going to be with family, none of us. So I don't know if you guys would like that idea.
I'm all for it.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So we'll kind of flesh that out this week and figure out what it's going to be like. But something Sunday morning, we can all come together.
I might be doing. I mean, depends on what you mean by Sunday morning, because my congregation's Zoom meeting runs in the morning.
Okay. All right. Just out of curiosity, what time is that?
We go from 9:30 to 12:30.
Okay. Good to know. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, no, I don't really have anything else to say. Like, just keep an eye out for breakout groups. This Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Of course, we'll still have those running for this week. We'll kind of extend what Dave led us in today. And thanks, Dave. So you said you wanted to close in prayer.
Yep. And just before, I just sent a message to everyone, kind of just summarizing the second part of what we walked through. And ideas of the culture are things valued, things that shape the culture itself, and those that are flagrantly just anti-God. And all three of those ideas, no, all three of those ideas exist.
You can, I don't know, raise of hands of anyone who's saved the chats that they use on Zoom.
Well, this one is also recorded, so.
Oh, the chats are recorded as well?
I don't know if the chats are, but.
I don't think they are. That's why I'm just bringing it up as a little point, just to save them, and of course edit them in case there are private messages between members. But it's just been a great thing for taking notes and then just fixing the format, and that's a great reminder for people, if you want to sign in your emails or what have you.
Good deal. Yeah, breakout groups Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we'll just pray. All right. Father God, thank you for another week of Faithful Exiles. I pray that we can recognize this in ourselves, and that these ideas that we're surrounded by that sometimes are elevating to you, but sometimes are very against you and what your scripture says. And I pray that we can have the discernment to recognize the difference, that we can see clearly your truth, and that we can take the response of a faithful exile. I pray for the people affected by the COVID right now, especially Gina's family, who lost somebody important to them, and recently with this whole thing. And I don't want to go into that, but Lord, we just lift up that family in this time. We lift up many families. We pray for our church body as a whole, that we can feel connected and help and be with each other in this difficult time, even though we are challenged in time that we are separated. Thank you for our time together, and I pray that this week can be your week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Dave.